Hello, I'm Garry Stevens, and welcome to the History in the Bible podcast. All the history, in all the books, in all the Bibles. Episode 1.55 Four Prophets of the Babylonian Crisis. In the last episode of the History in the Bible, I left the Judeans miserably marching their way to Babylon. The Bible gives us four prophets who worked in the last decades of Judah: Zephaniah, Jeremiah, Nahum, and Habakkuk. Let's start with Zephaniah. Who, you say? Exactly. According to the brilliant online resource that is BibleGateway.com, Zephaniah is one of the least accessed books of the entire Bible. Zephaniah is one of the 12 minor prophets, stuck between the equally obscure Habakkuk and Haggai. Let's take it from the top. Quote, Zephaniah 1:1. The word of Yahweh that came to Zephaniah during the reign of King Josiah of Judah. I will sweep everything away from the face of the earth, declares Yahweh. I will sweep away man and beast. I will sweep away the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea. I will make the wicked stumble, and I will destroy mankind from the face of the earth, declares Yahweh. I will stretch out my arm against Judah and against all who dwell in Jerusalem, and I will wipe out from this place every vestige of Baal, and the name of the priestlings along with the priests. End quote. Zephaniah is not someone you would invite to a bucks night or stag party. He would have been the world's worst suicide counsellor. Mercifully, his harrowing message runs for only 3 chapters, one of the shortest books in the Bible. More than any other prophet, he rails about the devastation that divine judgment will bring. Quote, Zephaniah 1:14. The great day of Yahweh is approaching most swiftly. Hark, the day of Yahweh, it is better. There a warrior shrieks. That day shall be a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of calamity and desolation, a day of darkness and deep gloom, a day of densest clouds. I will bring distress on the people, and they shall walk like blind men, because they sinned against Yahweh. Their blood shall be spilled like dust, and their fat like dung. Moreover, their silver and gold shall not avail to save them on the day of Yahweh's wrath, in the fire of his passion. The whole land shall be consumed, for he will make a terrible end of all who dwell in the land. End quote. Many scholars hold that this message of misery was written before Josiah's reforms. Once Josiah's religious revolution was complete, these scholars say, Zephaniah wrote his last chapter with a message of hope. Note the phrase, in that day. We've heard it before in the prophet Isaiah, and we will hear it many times again in Series 2 of this podcast. Quote, Zephaniah 3:11. In that day you will no longer be shamed for all the deeds by which you have defied me. For then I will remove the proud and exultant within you, and you will be haughty no more. But I will leave within you a poor, humble folk, and they shall find refuge in the name of Yahweh. Shout for joy, fair Zion, cry aloud, O Israel. Rejoice and be glad with all your heart, fair Jerusalem. Yahweh has annulled the judgment against you. He has swept away your foes. Israel's sovereign Yahweh is within you. You need fear misfortune no more. End quote. Zephaniah's name was also attached to an apocalypse, written sometime before the early church father Clement of Alexandria quoted it in the 2nd century AD. There's not much to say about it. In the fragments we have of this work, the prophet receives the usual heavenly tour and revelations of the tribulations to come. The author was probably a Hellenistic Jew who appropriated the prophet's name. He may have wanted the prophet's authority, or he believed he was writing in Zephaniah's spirit. I'll have a lot to say about apocalypses in Series 2. Where almost no one knows Zephaniah, the other prophet who began his ministry in Josiah's reign is one of the biggies. Jeremiah was a descendant of the ancient priestly line of Eli, the line that Solomon had replaced with the family of Zadok. I've already talked about his role as a foreign policy advisor. Now, let's get to the book and the man. At 52 chapters, Jeremiah's book is one of the longest in the Bible, right after Samuel at 33,000 Hebrew words. The literary style of the narratives and their overall perspective on the relationship between God and Israel correspond closely to the traditions of the Book of Kings. No doubt that is why rabbinic tradition holds that the prophet wrote his own book, as well as the Book of Kings and the Book of Lamentations. The Book of Jeremiah itself claims that the prophet's scribe Baruch wrote several versions of the oracle. The first half of the book is mainly told in the first person, the second mainly in the third. Many scholars attribute these to Jeremiah's faithful scribe. The book of Jeremiah is a mixed collection of poetic oracles, biographical stories, and historical material. Unfortunately, the historical details are scattered in a confused order throughout the book. An incident about a later king of Judah will be presented chapters before an anecdote about an earlier one. The Septuagint version of Jeremiah is somewhat shorter than the Masoretic text. Its content is in a different order. Fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls contain Hebrew texts that conform to both the Septuagint and the Masoretic text. We have no way of knowing which is closer to the original, if such a concept even has any meaning. Jeremiah is the most miserable of the prophets. Listen to this. Quote, Jeremiah 25:8. Assuredly, thus said Yahweh of hosts, because you would not listen to my words, I am going to send for all the peoples of the north, declares Yahweh, and for my servant, King Nebuchadrezzar of Babylon, and bring them against this land and its inhabitants. I will exterminate them and make them a desolation, an object of hissing, ruins for all time. And I will banish them from the sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of bridegroom and bride, and the sound of the mill and the light of the lamp. This whole land shall be a desolate ruin. And those nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. When the 70 years are over, I will punish the king of Babylon, and that nation and the land of the Chaldeans for their sins, declares Yahweh, and I will make it a desolation for all time. End quote. Jeremiah is oddly silent about King Josiah's reforms, which he should have welcomed. Perhaps his words on the matter have been lost. Perhaps he was so focused on international threats that domestic developments just didn't interest him. Nor does he mention the royal Zion tradition, the notion that a king of the line of David will reign over the Hebrews forever. The prophet Isaiah is preoccupied with that, but in Jeremiah, not a word. Jeremiah is in a perpetual state of anguish at the coming disaster. He is one of the very few prophets who pours out his inner torment. He hates his life. He hates that he is compelled to bring his oracles of doom to the nation. Quote, Jeremiah 4:19. Oh, my heart, I writhe in pain. My heart pounds within me. I cannot be still. For I have heard the blast of enemy trumpets and the roar of their battle cries. Waves of destruction roll over the land until it lies in complete desolation. Suddenly my tents are destroyed. In a moment my shelters are crushed. How long must I see the battle flags and hear the trumpets of war? Accursed be the day that I was born. Let not the day be blessed when my mother bore me. Accursed be the man who brought my father the news and said, "A boy is born to you," and gave him such joy. End quote. Chapter after chapter is filled with this histrionic mourning. So much so that you have to suspect that Jeremiah is the man who invented schadenfreude, a delight in the misfortunes of others. He's actually thrilled to be the bearer of bad news. He wants his nation to be annihilated by the Babylonians. This guy must have Asperger's syndrome. Quote, Jeremiah 27. You enticed me, O Lord, and I was enticed. You overpowered me, and you prevailed. I have become a constant laughing stock. Everyone jeers at me. For every time I speak, I must cry out, must shout. Lawlessness and rapine. For the word of Yahweh causes me constant disgrace and contempt. End quote. For reasons perplexing only to himself, Jeremiah collects personal enemies like a mohair cardigan attracts pet fur. Long quote. Jeremiah 11:18. Then Yahweh told me about the plots my enemies were making against me. I was like a lamb being led to the slaughter. I had no idea that they were planning to kill me. Let's destroy this man and all his words, they said. Let's cut him down so his name will be forgotten forever. This is what Yahweh says about the men of Anatoth, who wanted me dead. They had said, "We will kill you if you do not stop prophesying in Yahweh's name." So this is what Yahweh of heaven's armies says about them. I will punish them. Their young men will die in battle, and their boys and girls will starve to death. Not one of these plotters from Anathoth will survive, for I will bring disaster upon them when their time of punishment comes. Then the people said, "Come on, let's plot a way to stop Jeremiah. We have plenty of priests and wise men and prophets. We don't need him to teach the word and give us advice and prophecies. Let's spread rumours about him and ignore what he says. Lord, hear me and help me. Listen to what my enemies are saying. Should they repay evil for good? They have dug a pit to kill me, though I pleaded for them and tried to protect them from your anger. So let their children starve. Let them die by the sword. Let their wives become childless widows. Let their old men die in a plague, and let their young men be killed in battle. Let screaming be heard from their homes, as warriors come suddenly upon them. For they have dug a pit for me, and have hidden traps along my path." End quote. Jeremiah is an obsessed nutcase. He's the angry, ranting old man who makes his own paranoid delusions come true just because he's so insane. He elevates personal vendettas into national crusades. Jeremiah spends 40 years telling anyone who listens that they will all soon be dead meat thanks to Babylon, and that anyone who rejects his message will die horribly. This is God's punishment for Judah's sins. But he's astonished that people don't invite him to more dinner parties. The prophet Nahum, is one of the 12 minor prophets. He wrote the second shortest book in the Christian Old Testament, a tiny 500 Hebrew words. That's a lot shorter than your aunt's last Facebook rant. According to data from the great site BibleGateway.com, Nahum is the second least accessed book in the entire Bible. I'll talk about the least read book in the second series of my podcast. Nahum's name seems to mean comforter or consoler. That is so inappropriate. Nahum is quite unlike any other prophet. He makes no prophecies. He barely mentions the Judeans. Even God only has a cameo appearance. He's nasty, brutish, and short. His 3 chapters are thoroughly secular poems, rejoicing at the destruction of the Assyrian capital of Nineveh. This would place him sometime between the fall of Nineveh in 612 BC and the first capture of Jerusalem by Babylon in 597 BC. Quote, Nahum 3:1. Ah, city of crime, utterly treacherous, full of violence, where killing never stops. Crack of whip and rattle of wheel, galloping steed and bounding chariot, charging horsemen, flashing swords, and glittering spears, hosts of slain, and heaps of corpses, dead bodies without number. They stumble over bodies, because of the countless harlotries of the harlot, who ensnared nations with her harlotries. I am going to deal with you, declares Yahweh of hosts. I will lift up your skirts over your face, and display your nakedness to the nations, and your shame to kingdoms. End quote. That imagery sounds more appropriate to a porn movie than the Bible, but what do I know? Nahum accepts that God used Assyria as the whip to chastise the wicked kingdom of Israel. But Assyria's savagery in so doing must itself be punished. Gentile nations should really look at the small print when they accept a commission from God to punish the Hebrews. Quote, Nahum 1:2. Yahweh is a passionate, avenging God. Yahweh is vengeful and fierce in wrath. Yahweh takes vengeance on his enemies. He rages against his foes. He rebukes the sea and dries it up, and he makes all rivers fail. The mountains quake because of him, and the hills melt. The earth heaves before him, the world and all that dwell therein. Who can stand before his wrath? Who can resist his fury? His anger pours out like fire, and rocks are shattered because of him. Yahweh is good to those who hope in him, a haven on a day of distress. He is mindful of those who seek refuge in him. Why will you plot against Yahweh? He wreaks utter destruction. No adversary opposes him twice. End quote. The prophet Habakkuk, wrote a few years after Nahum, and after the Babylonians had taken Jerusalem in 597 BC. His name is not a Hebrew one. You could not find 2 prophets more different. Nahum is a testosterone-fueled partisan, exulting over the destruction of an enemy that he did nothing to bring about. Habakkuk is a philosopher with an important question for God. Quote, Habakkuk 1:12. You, O Lord, are from everlasting, my holy God, you never die. You whose eyes are too pure to look upon evil, who cannot countenance wrongdoing. Why do you countenance treachery, and stand by idle, while the one in the wrong devours the one in the right? End quote. Why, asks the prophet, does God tolerate injustice? Are not you, God, yourself unjust? Habakkuk's book is the only one to raise this question before the book of Job. The biblical textbook answer was, none of your business, petty human. Habakkuk didn't buy that. He symbolically mounts a lookout post, awaiting an answer from the deity. Here is the Jewish Study Bible translation. Quote, Habakkuk 2:1. I will stand on my watch, take up my station at the post, and wait to see what he will say to me, what he will reply to my complaint. Yahweh answered me and said, write the prophecy down, inscribe it clearly on tablets, so that it can be read easily. For there is yet a prophecy for a set term, a truthful witness for a time that will come. Even if it tarries, wait for it still, for it will surely come without delay. Lo, his spirit within him is puffed up, and not upright. But the righteous man is rewarded with life for his fidelity." End quote. I find God's response unimpressive. Just have faith that justice will prevail in the future. In the next episode of The History in the Bible, I dive into the modern debates about the Babylonian deportations. Thanks for listening.